If you think a soldier standing still on his horse is just for show, you're about to see just how wrong and dangerous that assumption can be. It was noon, and Horse Guards Parade in the heart of London buzzed with tourists. Weekend sunlight poured over the old stones. The air was thick with the click of phone cameras and the low hum of expectation, weaving through an ocean of visitors eager for that perfect selfie with a piece of living British history. Across the vast manicured square, the iconic mounted guard unit prepared for their daily ceremonial changeover, a ritual rooted in centuries of discipline and tradition. At the very center of this stage stood Aston, a striking black warhorse standing a proud 5'8", taller with the plume of his patrol helmet brushing the sky. Aston's number, 48, was etched in brass across his tack, and his very presence drew whispers and attention. A living legend among animals, both for his size and composure. In his saddle sat Lance Corporal Jack Whitmore, a figure whose calm almost seemed carved in stone. Whitmore, newly transferred from the elite SAS to the Household Cavalry, wore the star-bright steel helmet and breastplate with barely a bead of sweat. Everything about his posture, rigid, hands precise on the reins, eyes steady behind the glint of his visor, spoke of long years spent between chaos and control. Today's crowd was different, restless, more excitable. Among them was Tyler Grant, a brash American YouTuber sporting $1 million smile and 2 million subscribers. Best known for exposing self-defense fakes and viral martial arts stunts. Flanked by a lean, alert filming crew, Tyler chatted loudly into a wireless mic, his voice rising above the clamor. What's the point of all this? Soldiers who only know how to pose for photos? Horses that just stand around? Is any of this real? A ripple ran through the crowd, a mix of laughter, curiosity, and growing discomfort. Phones pointed, faces leaned forward. 2 young security guards in sharp uniforms stepped closer, politely warning Tyler to remain behind the painted line. Tyler ignored them, addressing his online audience. Let's see if the Queen's Guard is actually as tough as people say, or if this is really just a pageant for tourists. A tense hush fell. Even the usual city noise seemed to draw back, replaced by the nervy anticipation of something unscripted about to unfold. Kids perched on their parents' shoulders watched, eyes wide. An elderly couple whispered in French. The sun glinted off Whitmore's helmet. He was the picture of discipline, not reacting to the insults, not stirring, even as Tyler's words cut closer, stoking the fire and drawing more phones into the air, red dots of recording lights multiplying. Aston flicked an ear, barely a sign, but Whitmore felt it, a subtle shift in the horse's balance, hinting at unease. A ripple of tension, horse and man tuned to each other beneath the spectacle. Suddenly, a tourist, perhaps emboldened by Tyler's mockery, took a step too close, phone outstretched for a better shot. Whitmore's voice, low but commanding, rang out. "Sir, step back. For your safety, please remain behind the barrier." The man recoiled, a little embarrassed, but it broke the silence, making the air snap with possibility. Tyler seized the moment. Striding right up to the edge of the forbidden zone, he now had the full attention of every person in the square. Some egged him on, others shook their heads in disbelief, sensing disaster on the horizon. The smallest, most fragile border between order and chaos felt ready to break. As his camera crew shuffled into position, Tyler called out, "Hey soldier, does your horse bite, or do you just look pretty for the camera?" Laughter rumbled through the tourists. Whitmore did not flinch. From his vantage point, the world slowed. He watched every twitch of Tyler's hand, every step of the cameraman circling left, an eyes in the back of his head awareness carved from years of real danger, not YouTube antics. Just when it seemed Tyler might back down, a nearby group of local kids decided to test their luck. One of them tossed a piece of bread toward Aston's hooves. The horse did not budge, only shifted his weight, nostrils flaring gently. Trained for resilience, not panic, his eyes fixed on Whitmore. Suddenly, over the square's ancient mosaic came the sharp slap of Tyler's hand on his thigh, a final taunting signal to his subscribers before pushing the tension to breaking point. Anyone can stand still, but can you fight if it matters? Whitmore exhaled, slow and silent. The energies were primed, and the first real move was only seconds away. In those moments, while tourists jostled for the best angle and security kept one wary eye on Tyler's growing spectacle, the classic standoff between those who serve with discipline and those who live for clicks reached its boiling point. Somewhere in the crowd, a vendor's ice cream began to drip unnoticed, the day growing hotter, the air thicker. But right at the center, the horse, the soldier, the YouTuber, three lives were about to collide. And everyone watching felt the electric promise that something extraordinary or disastrous was about to happen. Only Aston, breathing steady and unshaken, seemed to know that discipline, patience, and trust between horse and rider were about to meet their ultimate test. The moment had arrived for the spectacle to shift from tense words to sudden action. Whispers grew as Tyler Grant, flush with adrenaline and surrounded by a sea of recording smartphones, decided to put tradition to the test. His confidence soared above common sense, his smile daring and desperate for validation. With the cameras trained on every move, Tyler took a step forward, breaking through the boundary of respect and into the personal space of the King's Guard. Jack Whitmore's training had taught him more about patience and discipline than any ordinary assignment could. Still, instincts honed in far more dangerous places flickered in his eyes as Tyler lunged. The helmeted rider made no aggressive move, his only action a steadying grip on Aston's reins. But Tyler, eager for a viral headline, let fly an open challenge not just to Whitmore, but to the centuries-honed dignity of military service. "Let's see if this is all for show," he yelled, then lunged at Whitmore's chest, his fist telegraphing the impact for any seasoned fighter to read. Simultaneously, Tyler's other hand reached up and slapped at Aston's thick, braided mane, a reckless act that for a moment seemed to hang in slow motion above the historic cobblestones. Marveling at the horse's steely calm, the surrounding crowd inhaled, the atmosphere charged, a brief pause stretching, as eyes snapped from the man to the powerful animal, not knowing what would happen first. Aston felt the jarring touch. Years of careful training kicked in. The horse, packed with muscle and discipline, shifted his weight, tossing his massive head just out of reach. There was no panic, no wild rearing, only a controlled adjustment. The animal's eyes flickered with awareness, body language screaming restraint but readiness as the slap passed harmlessly through the air. Whitmore reacted with equal swiftness and even greater precision. His right hand flashed out, intercepting Tyler's punch. With a clinical move, honed in close-quarters battles and perfected in countless drills, Whitmore twisted Tyler's wrist, rotating the attacker's arm across his own body. The next instant, too fast for anyone but those who had seen violence up close, Jack delivered a precise, non-lethal strike to Tyler's diaphragm. It was not about force, but skill, a calculated shot aimed to neutralize, not injure. Tyler froze, the wind driven out his lungs. His bravado melted as he doubled over, knees buckling, face contorted in pure shock and confusion. A chorus of gasps swept through the crowd. Even the tourists, still giggling moments before, fell silent, unsure whether they had just witnessed a performance or an emergency. In one slow-motion second, the crowd's perspective shifted violently, from amused observers to startled witnesses of something deeply real. One security guard instinctively reached for his radio, calling for backup, his hand trembling. Children clung to parents, some too young to understand, but old enough to sense fear. The film crew around Tyler wavered, their camera momentarily pointed down as reality shattered the content they had hoped to capture. The show had ended, only raw consequence remained. Whitmore, never letting go of Aston's reins, maintained his soldier's poise. One hand on the taut leather, the other guarding against any repeat attack, he watched Tyler slump forward, struggling to breathe. In that frozen tableau, it was not the weapon or the size of the man that spoke of strength, but a discipline that refused to waver in the face of provocation. A slow ripple ran through the crowd, many lowering their phones, unsure if they should keep filming. Here was the lesson rarely seen in viral videos. Real training did not make a soldier quick to attack, but impossibly fast and measured when forced to act. The iconic scarlet tunic and shining breastplate no longer looked like mere costume, but a shield of character, patience, and experience. The huge horse, too, stood as evidence. Shock and chaos passed over him like water on stone, calm etched into every muscle and gesture. As Whitmore guided Aston away from the commotion in a series of careful, controlled steps, the crowd parted in awe. Tyler, gasping, tried to regain his feet, but the damage was done. His grand experiment had ended not in triumph, but humiliation. There was no loud victory, no further taunt from Whitmore, only disciplined calm and a steadfast return to duty, the ultimate answer to provocation. It was in that subtle, nearly invisible display, a single soldier halting chaos with minimal force, an animal trained for balance as much as power, that the underlying message of the King's Guard was revealed for all to see. This was not theater. This was the modern edge of centuries-old discipline, still sharp, still real, still capable of silencing violence with a single breathless moment. As the crowd slowly recovered its collective nerve, a new respect filled the square. Tourists exchanged glances, their assumptions shaken. And somewhere, among the watching thousands, more than one person put down the phone, not to stop recording, but to silently applaud what tradition, training, and true professionalism still meant in a world so quick to test their worth. A deep and sudden silence fell over Horse Guard's parade, far more intense than before the chaos. It was as if the entire square had paused to process what they had witnessed. For a brief, breathless moment, nobody moved. Not the tourists with their outstretched phones, not the security guards frozen beside the barriers. In this charged lull, every eye shifted between the American YouTuber on his knees and the towering figure of Lance Corporal Jack Whitmore, who remained motionless on Aston's broad back. Jack's posture was unmistakable, alert, composed, and in absolute control. He did not gloat or bask in the crowd's shocked attention. Instead, he reached over, signaling a simple command to Aston. The Warhorse responded instantly, backing up 3 measured steps as if on parade, hooves clicking sharply on the ancient stones. Whitmore lowered his ceremonial sword until the shining tip rested against the top of his boot, a move not just of tradition, but of tactical awareness, a signal that a dangerous situation had ended for now, yet caution remained. Tyler Grant's chest heaved. Starved for air, he drew ragged breaths, doubled over in the center of the square. Despite the humiliation, there was no additional force, no act of retribution from the King's Guard. The only sound was the steady, calming exhale from Aston, the great horse letting out a drawn-out snort as if the drama concerned him no more than a trickle of afternoon rain. This scene, horse and rider remaining statuesque, unbothered, became a silent lesson to everyone present. Control mattered even more than power. Swift and direct, Whitmore broke his silence. "Medical, please, over here." His voice was firm, not loud, but it cut through the stunned crowd with new authority. Instinctively, the festival of cameras gave way for a pair of medical staff, who rushed in with a small kit, checking Tyler's breathing and gently helping him to sit upright. Whitmore kept his gaze fixed not on Tyler, but on the crowd, his responsibility far from over. Even Aston's gaze swept the group, huge, dark eyes following the nervous movements of tourists and the shifting line of security guards. What surprised many was the horse's composure. Aston's training showed in every line of his body, muscles taut, ears flicking but never pinning back in fear or aggression. No wild jerks, no flashes of panic, just a calm, collected patience that felt almost human, earned by months of demanding desensitization along city streets and through endless drills beside roaring traffic. A few in the crowd, those who understood horses, pointed in quiet admiration, whispering in several languages about the brilliance of the cavalry's animal handling. Someone even explained to their daughter that Aston likely endured 8 to 10 months of daily work just to become this unflappable. Gradually, the energy began to ease. Cameras lowered, more out of respect than boredom. The crowd realized they had not witnessed a staged event or a cheap confrontation for social media, but a flash of real-world skill under pressure. Curious now, people watched the medical team tending to Tyler, the lines on his face betraying mingled pain and humiliation. Yet still, there was no offer of gloating from Whitmore. As the minutes stretched, two more important developments followed. First, the changeover of the mounted guard continued, almost as if nothing had disturbed their ancient ritual. Bathed in sunlight and framed by centuries-old architecture, the newly arriving soldiers moved in perfect time. The brassy sound of a regimental band stationed just beyond the crowd took on a heavier significance. The familiar tunes seemed to lift the mood, reminding spectators that the military's discipline endures far beyond fleeting spectacle. Second, the square's natural rhythm slowly returned. Some tourists, shaking their heads, replayed video clips for their friends. Others retreated from the barricade, perhaps rethinking their sense of personal boundaries. Among these, a family from Canada exchanged glances, the father quietly murmuring in awe, "I thought it was all just a show, but it's clearly much more than that." Through it all, Jack Whitmore never broke character, even as his nerves surely simmered beneath the surface. Trained to expect the unexpected, he managed the aftermath with the same discipline that had allowed him to neutralize Tyler's attack. Aston, too, was more than just scenery, his very presence a living emblem of centuries of tradition and care. In Whitmore's subtle cues and the Warhorse's steady breath, the crowd witnessed the results of a bond built on daily trust and relentless drilling. Soon, the last notes of the regimental music faded. The mounted guards completed their shift, and order settled like a warm blanket over the stones of the square. The stillness carried a new meaning, not emptiness, but respect, as if everyone had learned something about courage that comes from patience, not bravado. In that space, you could hear nothing but the sound of horses' hooves and the far-off notes of a military bugle, underscoring a lesson that would echo long after the cameras turned off. As the crowd began to disperse, some drawn away by the final notes of the parade, and others by the quiet drama unraveling at the heart of the square, a deeper story continued beneath the surface, a story that shaped every move Lance Corporal Jack Whitmore and his horse Aston made that day. Standing vigilant astride Aston, Whitmore's eyes seemed to drift for a moment, his focus anchoring to something beyond the busy scene. Back to countless nights on the training grounds, memories etched deep by discipline and necessity. It was not long ago that he, freshly transferred from the SAS, was assigned responsibility for Aston, the promising, powerful black of the Royal Cavalry. Their first training regiment together was rigorous, often under the blanket of darkness beside his regiment's senior handlers. Each exercise tougher and more harrowing than the last. In his memory's eye, he relived a cold March night. Flickers of artificial light danced on the mane of young Aston as Whitmore cinched the saddle and prepared him for another street simulation, not merely for ceremony, but for war. Explosions of simulated artillery echoed along the darkened training ring, while shadows darted around, recreating urban chaos. Aston, bred for courage and physically commanding, nonetheless startled at the unfamiliar bursts of sound. Whitmore whispered quiet commands, his grip gentle yet firm on the reins, his words an anchor in the chaos. There were no cameras, no spectators, only trust and repetition. Night after night, through smoke and confusion, man and horse learned each other. Aston learning not to flinch, Whitmore learning the subtle language of a horse's fears and resilience. One memory struck sharper than the rest. The infamous incident with the cavalry horses Vita and Quaker, a headline event when 4 horses bolted through city streets during a routine exercise, setting off a chain scrabble of panic. That spring morning in London, Whitmore and his team had raced to respond, the event underscoring how even the most disciplined units could face the unexpected. The after-action review had been thorough, no blaming, just collective learning. It was a lesson that lived at the fore of Whitmore's mind, fueling his constant review of drills, new safety signals, and making sure Aston would never let fear outweigh duty. At the Royal Mews and training stables, he helped run sessions with fireworks, horns, weaving their horses through chaos so their calm on the parade ground was anything but accidental. The flashbacks faded with the sound of a distant trumpet, drawing Whitmore back to the present. He glanced downward and gave Aston a subtle pat, so slight only those well-versed in horses would have caught it. Aston's years of exposure to street noise, unpredictable onlookers, and, yes, even the random slaps from showmen like Tyler had hardened him into an unbeaten warhorse. But none of this could have been possible without the ancient system of military preparation, a system older than Aston, older even than the city's stones. More than once, tourists had questioned why, in the era of technology and digital warfare, the British Army still assigned serving soldiers to stand whisper silent on the parade ground astride living tanks. The answer was both tradition and tactical necessity. Whitmore's regiment, like those before them for over 3 centuries, maintained a unique rhythm. Months in high-threat deployments, from harsh desert patrols to covert urban operations, followed by intense periods of ceremonial duty at the nation's heart. This cycle, a backbone for the Household Cavalry since the 1660s, forged soldiers who could balance the invisible weight of history and the real threat of danger. For each guardsman, the transition was a crucible, demanding the same composure when holding a ceremonial sword as when facing adversity in Afghanistan or on the streets of London. This dual existence, Whitmore realized, demanded not just skill at arms, but humility and constant relearning. Every parade day brought a new crowd, different faces, fresh risks, but always the same traditions threading soldier to soldier, generation to generation. When accidents occurred, as they inevitably did, the unit did not hide from them. They dissected every failing, updated every protocol, ensuring what happened to Vita and Quaker would never repeat. In the silence that followed the disruption, a few curious bystanders edged closer, peppering the stablemaster with questions as he adjusted Aston's gear. How do you make a horse so calm? How do soldiers learn to sit so still for so long through heat and boredom and provocation? Did Whitmore get scared? The answers, Whitmore thought, had nothing to do with being unshakable, but rather with accepting uncertainty and returning again and again to the basics: trust, routine, discipline. Horses like Aston, legendary for their patience, and soldiers trained to answer chaos with order, were not born. They were made by ritual and hardship, by mentorship and humility. Day after day, drill after drill, trust was built bone deep. By the time the last echo of the regimental band faded, Whitmore and Aston embodied this centuries-old pact between human and animal, between tradition and present-day service. All the crowd saw was the surface: shining boots, polished tack, implacable calm. Beneath it ran a river of effort, failure, and quietly hard-earned resilience, proof that when spectacle gave way to real confrontation, the foundation held, and respect for that unseen labor echoed well beyond the square. With the medical responders finishing up and the parade music fading into memory, the square's atmosphere hovered between relief and anxiety, a sense that not all drama was spent. As the crowd's energy began to return, whispers grew bolder. Tyler Grant, humiliated and breathless, slowly got to his feet. His pride, wounded far more than his body, burned in his eyes as he glanced around and spotted the lenses still focused on him. The world was watching, and the least he could do was save face, for the cameras, for his audience, and for himself. Drawing himself up, Tyler forced a crooked half-smile, waving off the medical staff. I'm fine," he declared, though his words wavered. Without a hint of gratitude, he twisted the event for his livestream audience. They got lucky. Let's run it back. Let's see a fair round. His tone was loud. Instantly, a ripple of nervous excitement moved through both the tourists and his filming crew, who began whispering about Part 2, nudging each other to keep rolling, sensing another chance for virality. The officers on security detail were not so amused. One middle-aged sergeant, his face weathered by years of policing London crowds, stepped forward with authority. "Sir, you need to leave this area immediately," he said, his voice low but filled with finality. "You're disrupting official duties. This isn't a show." Tyler, determined to reclaim his narrative, ignored the command, raising his arms in ostentatious surrender to the camera, a visual cue to his followers that he was being singled out unfairly. Just then, someone in Tyler's crew, emboldened by the chaos and Tyler's bravado, took a step further. "Let's see if it's just for show," the young cameraman called out, barely 20 and masked in the bravado of the crowd's attention. He lunged past the cordon, grabbing at Aston's reins with one hand, attempting to pull the horse away from Whitmore. For a tense beat, both horse and soldier froze, a blur of motion as Whitmore's left hand shot to steady the reins, his right hand dropping discreetly to his sword hilt. Aston, sensing trouble through vibration and voice, responded with remarkable poise. Rather than lash out, the huge black horse slid sideways, shifting his massive frame to place himself between Whitmore and the aggressor. Using the breadth of his body, Aston pressed the crew member back, not with aggression, but with measured force. The young man, expecting resistance but not this sort of weight and intelligence, found himself squashed gently yet firmly against the cold metal of the crowd barrier. The onlookers gasped, some half expecting a flying kick, but Aston's training showed. His legs stayed rooted, his breath steady, as he simply stood his ground, blocking and containing without resorting to violence. Whitmore immediately called out a single command: "Steady." The sharp, practiced word ricocheted through the situation, a signal both horse and soldier responded to from years of drilled training. Aston relaxed a fraction, holding the line but no longer increasing the pressure. The young crewman, wide-eyed and pinned but unharmed, stared up at Whitmore and the massive Warhorse in disbelief, shock quickly turning into wide-eyed respect. This escalation was too much for the authorities. Police officers who had been on the periphery now moved in with urgency, waving off the remaining crew and pulling the young man away from the barricade and Aston. "You've crossed the line," a constable barked, seizing Tyler's arm firmly but not roughly. The rest of the tourists caught the edge in the law officer's voice and gave ground. Cameras rattled. Tourists filmed this second confrontation, while others snapped nervous photos, not quite believing the turn this display of disrespect had taken. In seconds, the mood had transformed. Some of the crowd murmured in support of the King's Guard, voices breaking through the tension. "He's a pro, give it a rest." "You don't mess with the cavalry, mate." Others debated, a few voices still supporting Tyler's challenge as freedom of expression. But the majority now understood what was at stake. These men and animals were not photo props, but part of the living, breathing defense of the realm and British tradition. Meanwhile, atop Aston, Whitmore's face was a mask of resolve. He maintained his seat, eyes tracking every movement, a living embodiment of vigilance. Through it all, Aston was more than an animal. He was a wall of discipline and instinct, standing between chaos and order, teaching with every step that true strength needs no show or spectacle. As officers began to clear the immediate area around the guard, the square once again exhaled, the tension abating in slow waves. Somewhere at the back of the throng, a small child raised a hand in silent applause, amazed not by force or anger, but by a living lesson in self-control. The incident was not merely a second confrontation, but a living demonstration of precisely why these oldest of traditions endure, where the thin, unbreakable line between provocation and protection must be marked and, if crossed, answered firmly but justly. With the police now firmly in control, Aston and Whitmore once more took position as sentinels. Not statues, not actors, but the beating heart of living history, offering the public a reassurance that, even under pressure, duty and discipline will always hold. The tension that had been quietly simmering all morning finally reached its boiling point. The attempt by Tyler's crew to pull Aston away set off a ripple through the crowd that swiftly escalated. In moments, what had seemed like a public spectacle turned into full-blown disorder. Voices grew loud as half a dozen bystanders jostled sideways, and several tourists, anxious and unsure, pressed in closer toward the barriers, trying to see what would come next. The distinct sound of police whistles shrilled through the square, slicing across the murmur of onlookers and the confused shouting of Tyler and his team. All at once, control threatened to slip away. Whitmore, sensing a potential stampede, tightened his grip on the reins, scanning for the greatest risk, not just to himself and Aston, but to the civilian crowd as well. In all directions, security personnel raced to reinforce the perimeter, hands waving and deep voices warning, "Step back, everyone, step back." Tourists stumbled backward, some ducking under outstretched arms, others pausing in indecision, their phones still raised as if recording could offer them a shield. Aston, built for battle as much as for show, felt the chaos vibrate up through the stones. Every part of his training surged to the fore. For a brief moment, Whitmore sensed the big horse tense, not out of fear, but out of anticipation, ready to react if the crowd closed in. Another tourist, caught between nervous laughter and real panic, tripped and fell against the curb, nearly getting tangled in Aston's bridle. The crowd's panic threatened to spook even the bravest of horses. Aston's ears flicked back and his chest rose. For the briefest instant, he half-reared, powerful forelegs trembling inches above the cobblestones. Whitmore showed his training, not reacting with panic, but instead sliding from the saddle in a controlled, smooth motion. Never letting go of the reins, he moved with calculated intent, landing beside Aston's massive shoulders in a crouch, one hand steady on the bridle, the other palm facing the crowd, like a living wall between civilian chaos and 1,000 pounds of animal muscle. Whitmore ran through the emergency dismount protocol drilled into every Kingsguard. Get clear, move fast, put yourself between your horse and the crowd, keep reins short and under control. He addressed both his mount and the alarmed tourists in quick, confident phrases. "Easy boy, back up, make room." His voice was calm but loud, a rally point amid disorder. Aston responded, shifting back on command, swinging his haunches carefully away from the crumbling edge of the cordon. Whitmore led him with one hand, using his own body to shield any risk of a child or panicked spectator being accidentally kicked. The horse's hooves, shod for the unpredictable, were lifted deliberately. Never a lunge, never a wild strike, just the discipline that separates a trained cavalry mount from anything less. A woman in a straw hat dropped her bag in the confusion and scrambled toward it, momentarily crossing into the gap between horse and fence. Whitmore shifted position, gently steering Aston so his flank blocked her path, keeping her safe while officers moved in to escort her behind the security line. For a tense minute, the parade ground felt like a battleground. Even the most seasoned officers had to use body weight to hold people back, their instructions competing with 20 different languages, distress, and a swirl of panic. In this electric atmosphere, the experience of soldier and horse became the subtle pivot. Order restored not by brute force, but by discipline and skill. As the square settled, Whitmore executed the emergency mount and retreat learned over endless drills. With one practiced motion, he swung back onto Aston, squeezed the horse gently forward, and guided him in a wide arc away from the densest part of the crowd. The action was swift, smooth, almost balletic, drawing a collective breath from the watchers. Behind them, the rest of the guard reformed their line, and a handful of tourists who had overstepped the boundary were calmly escorted away by police. When things finally returned to a steady rhythm, a few stunned faces in the crowd began murmuring in new tones, half awed, half apologetic. No longer did Whitmore and Aston seem decorative. Now every person saw them as the razor's edge between calm and calamity. Whitmore's uniform, now faintly marked with dust, was proof enough. Order was hard work, and peace required readiness for battle. For those who thought a cavalryman was just for show, the events of the day offered a sharp correction. Whitmore had faced bedlam with nothing but his body, his voice, and the training that allowed him to balance 25 kilos of ceremonial armor on top of 600 kilos of living power, even as panic threatened to undo everything. Amidst the crowd, a gray-haired man, voice trembling, said, "That's worth more than any show you could put on." It was hard to disagree. The discipline of horse and human had prevented an injury, a stampede, or something much, much worse. The crisis faded as quickly as it had flared, leaving behind a humbling silence and the even steps of a guardsman back at his post, a living testament to the strength and necessity of the discipline that underpins tradition. With the last echoes of chaos fading and a strained calm returning to Horse Guards parade, law enforcement took swift, visible action. The officers, now reinforced by additional support from both the Met Police and on-site palace security, radiated authority. Their presence soothed some lingering nerves, for it was now clear that this incident would not be brushed aside as mere antics or viral content. Justice was about to take its course, as tradition demanded and the law required. With the last echoes of chaos fading and a strained calm returning to Horse Guards parade, law enforcement took swift, visible action. The officers, now reinforced by additional support from both the Met Police and on-site palace security, radiated authority. Their presence soothed some lingering nerves, for it was now clear that this incident would not be brushed aside as mere antics or viral content. Justice was about to take its course, as tradition demanded and the law required. The first order of business was Tyler Grant. Still defiant, his breath recovered but his confidence battered, he attempted a final explanation before the officers. "I was just making a point for my audience. Nobody got hurt," he protested, shoving his phone at a constable as evidence. The officer, unimpressed and unmoved, shook his head. "Assaulting a member of the armed forces on duty is a criminal offense under the Public Order Act. You've overstepped the law, not just the line." Handcuffs clicked around Tyler's wrists in plain view of everyone, the ultimate, sobering punctuation to his bravado. The same treatment followed for his crew member who had tried to pull Aston away, the young man clearly shaken as his equipment was gathered and police briskly recited his rights. Their faces, which had brimmed with self-assured energy just minutes before, now carried a dramatic mix of humiliation, confusion, and disbelief. A crowd had gathered around the scene, their anticipation replaced by a new sense of seriousness. No longer was this a spectacle for the camera, but the reality of consequences. Foreign tourists whispered in several languages, their holiday photos replaced with video evidence that just a show could lead to serious repercussions, even in a setting as ceremonial as this. Nearby, two visitors from Canada exchanged glances. "I always thought this was just a tourist thing," one murmured, his voice tinged with awe. "Guess I was wrong." Police officers began to move among the crowd, quietly taking down statements from anyone who had witnessed the events, particularly those with video. A young woman in a blue raincoat replayed her phone footage for a constable, her hands trembling. Across the square, another was asked to describe exactly when Tyler had first crossed the barrier. Whitmore, having remounted Aston and resumed his calm, measured presence, watched the process with silent steadiness. Not once did he try to reclaim the narrative. He simply observed, his detachment and example of professionalism. No need for gloating. The law and the discipline of the King's Guard spoke for themselves. It did not take long for officers to finish collecting names, statements, and digital evidence. Tyler and his companion were escorted to a waiting police van, their bravado crushed under the final weight of reality. The Public Order Act loomed, a potential punishment of up to 12 months imprisonment for the charge of assaulting a serving member of the armed forces on ceremonial duty. The terms were made public as media and the curious alike pressed in, hungry for official statements that would soon dominate the news. Order gradually seeped back into the day. The sound of the mounted patrols resumed. The sun cut through the thinning clouds, and the crowds, though smaller and more contemplative now, lingered to process what they had seen. The military band had ceased playing, replaced by the practical efficiency of the law, another expression of tradition, but this time one forged in modern necessity. At the edge of the dispersing crowd, an older tourist from America approached a constable. "Has anything like this happened before?" she asked quietly, her accent unmistakable and her concern genuine. The officer thought for a moment. "The guard's discipline is rarely tested like this, but the law is there for a reason. These are not actors, and this isn't a theme park. Everyone here is protected, for their own sake and for the dignity of what we do." A few final tourists filmed the police vehicle as it drove away, the handcuffed figures visible through the rear glass. The message was unmistakable, set in the firm lines of the soldiers on the parade ground and echoed in the crisp uniforms of the constables. No show, no matter how viral, could ever rise above the law and the values it was meant to serve. As the officers tied up their final paperwork and the eventful afternoon wound slowly toward a return to pageantry, Jack Whitmore resumed his vigil. The sparkle of ceremony returned as if nothing had been disturbed. But everyone who had witnessed those moments knew that this calm was earned, built on the solid, enduring foundations of rule, respect, and readiness. Behind every parade and piece of tradition lies a commitment not just to spectacle, but to the ideal that order, justice, and dignity are not up for grabs, no matter the pressure of the moment or the lure of the camera. By evening, the events of Horse Guards Parade had exploded from the tourist videos and security feeds to dominate both British headlines and American social media. At first, it was a single shaky clip, then another from a different angle, and finally, a professionally edited 4K video uploaded by an onlooker with a drone capturing the entire incident from high above the square. The footage raced across platforms: YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, collecting millions of views before dinner time. The video's opening moments: Tyler Grant strutting, the first punch, Aston's measured sidestep, Whitmore's calm, precise defense, looped on late news and in reaction videos, everywhere from cozy British living rooms to college dorms in Los Angeles. Hashtags trended, hashtag King's Guard Showdown, hashtag Not Just For Show, hashtag Aston the Legend. The debate was electric. Social commentators pounced on the drama. Some called it an overreaction, others cited it as a searing lesson in respect. Keyboard warriors beware, the real world answers back. Opinions splintered. Those seeing the guard for the first time were surprised. Others defended Tyler as a content crusader. But the overwhelming tide rolled in favor of the guard. BBC broke the full story that evening in a special segment. The anchor, somber and measured, described the unprecedented incident and replayed slow-motion footage of Whitmore intercepting Tyler's fist, the Warhorse's powerful yet gentle reaction, the poise through crisis. Footage from before the incident showed Whitmore and Aston in their calm routine, a tear rolling down the face of a child as the band played. Next came the arrest. The moment handcuffs clicked shut, the clipped professionalism of the Met Police, and Tyler's ashen face as the van pulled away. Talk radio, breakfast news, and podcasts across 2 continents took up the question. What is the value of tradition? How do you police the line between content creation and law? Calls poured in, with veterans praising the guard's restraint and animal behaviorists lauding Aston's training. Typical YouTube drama channels invited British historians for heated, sometimes hilarious debates. Some Americans misunderstood the ceremony altogether. Others, having served or visited London, set the record straight. A particularly poignant moment arrived when ITV broadcast a short live interview with Colonel Sir Malcolm Price, retired but still formidable, the gold braid on his uniform catching the studio lights. The interviewer pressed, "Is this kind of discipline still relevant, or just for the tourists?" Sir Malcolm answered without hesitation, "Discipline in stillness is the bedrock of decisive action. The spectacle is not about appearing impressive. It is the visible tip of a lifetime's training, the shield against chaos. If you let media noise outweigh real skill, you lose the heart of what keeps a society secure." His words were clipped across countless highlight reels and quoted by both sides of the Atlantic. Meanwhile, interviews surfaced with eyewitnesses still stunned by how quickly bravado had crumpled. One Canadian tourist's now viral post said, "The King's Guard didn't just look real, they were real. 5 seconds of action changed everything I ever thought about British pageantry." For Tyler Grant's fans, the day was chaos too. His account went dark, management issued a short statement blaming misjudged content, and debate raged over his motives. Several brands quietly dropped their sponsorships. On forums, creators argued how quickly pranks can turn criminal. For many, the sight of a crew member in cuffs beside Tyler became a digital warning. But perhaps most remarkable was the outpouring of respect for the Black Warhorse himself. Clips of Aston stepping sideways to block the troublemaker, holding his ground with serene intelligence, drew praise from animal lovers and soldiers alike. Horse trainers around Britain commented on the bond between rider and horse, explaining in detail the hours of work required for such trust. You cannot fake that reaction. It's not acting. That's a partner. A partner who's been through storms, drills, and street noise with one person over and over again. Some accounts spun up fan art, editing Aston in superhero capes or running with CGI herds across iconic London landscapes. The day after, the crowd at Horse Guards grew. People came from across London and beyond, not to taunt, but to offer silent thanks. For a while, applause and flowers replaced the selfie sticks. Reporters interviewed children in awe, young cadets taking notes, and, most often, veterans who stated quietly, "That is why we serve, and why the line must hold." The incident was now more than a viral event. It was a mirror to a world chasing spectacle and novelty, asking who would draw the line when things got out of control. The answer, for millions, had become clear. Beneath the tradition, behind the uniforms, were professionals, men and horses ready to do the right thing no matter who was watching or what was trending. And as the headlines receded, what remained was respect for skill, for discipline, and for the living legacy everyone had witnessed in the middle of a London parade ground that was, at last, silent again. Night settled over London, yet discussion of the incident at Horse Guards Parade did not subside. Commentary flowed from living rooms and kitchens through screens big and small, as families debriefed what they had seen on the news. Some debated the law. Many questioned social media's reach. But a common undercurrent ran through the talk. What had made such a decisive difference that afternoon? What separated the ones who had held the line from those who disrupted it? And, deeper still, why did it matter? To most, the figure at the story's center remained clear. Lance Corporal Jack Whitmore, neither aggressor nor victim, but the symbol of measured authority under pressure. As the world judged clips and sound bites in isolation, the full nuance lay unspoken. Whitmore's reaction that day was not about physical strength, but the quiet power of restraint. 10 years ago, he might have met force with force on the battlefield. Now he stood as a gatekeeper of tradition, compelled to respond with minimal violence, maximum effect. What looked effortless was decades in the making. His poise, the stillness in chaos, echoed the ethos passed from sergeant to recruit over centuries. When you must act, time shrinks. What you do matters, not just in the moment, but in the memory of everyone who sees it. Analysts carried that reflection into the commentary cycle. One military ethics professor on BBC4 commented, "The ideal modern warrior subdues with care, not domination. If you cannot hold yourself in check, you cannot hold the public's trust." Listeners nodded, many for the first time seeing ceremonial soldiers as guardians not just of palaces, but of a fragile social contract. Meanwhile, those with a lifetime in the saddle argued that this honor belonged not to Whitmore alone. Aston, the black warhorse lauded across social media, was more than backdrop. He was the product of intentional, generational care, bred and trained for purpose and partnership. You see courage, but what you are really witnessing is centuries-long breeding combined with relentless exposure and trust-building, said a cavalry trainer on national radio. These horses are taught, no, invited, to keep calm even when their instincts scream otherwise. They're heroes too, in their own right. A viral infographic showed how Aston's lineage stretched back before the invention of the automobile. Every generation living through war and peace, parades and real threats. Only those exceeding every test joined the black wall of the Kingsguard. Parents used the story as a bedtime reflection, retelling how one man and horse stood their ground not for glory, but to preserve order and respect. There are some lines one grandmother shared with her granddaughter that should never be crossed, and sometimes it is the quiet, unmoving ones who are the most brave. Over the days that followed, professional trainers, military historians, and even philosophers weighed in. The message became more refined with each telling. Ceremony and capability do not compete. They walk hand in hand. Parade ground stillness is not an absence of skill, but its highest test. Training, sometimes mocked by those outside the world of arms, is in truth the tool that prevents unnecessary harm. The Guard's public code, once viewed as rigid tradition, now shown as a model of how power could be bridled through character. A student in a London cafe made a viral post reflecting, "Next time I see the Guard, I'll see the invisible years behind every salute, the drills, the calm, the near misses, and I hope I'll have the sense to show respect, because what holds them together could hold us all together." Meanwhile, within the stables, handlers checked Aston carefully. The old sergeant in charge, weathered by decades of service, lingered by the stall, running a hand along the horse's flank. "You did well," he murmured, a phrase meant as much for the animal as the guardsman who led him. Aston responded with a breathy snort, content, his head nuzzling the sergeant's shoulder. Every soldier who passed by gave a nod to both their fellow guardsmen and his trusty mount. Importantly, the event did more than affirm individual heroism. It forged a renewed public understanding. True service in any age means more than drill or duty or even courage alone. It requires commitment to something greater, the belief that one is but a link in an unbroken chain stretching centuries into the past and weeks into the future. Ceremony and combat readiness are not opposites. In fact, each strengthens the other. Remove the ritual and you risk forgetting the discipline that ensures peace. Lose the real skill and the spectacle goes hollow. On that day, Horse Guards Parade, and by extension the world watching, learned that respect cannot be demanded, only inspired. Tradition, far from stifling freedom, can foster it, so long as those holding the line understand their power lies not in the right to act, but the wisdom to choose when and how, and most critically, when not to use it. And so, as London drifted into the quiet of another night, the deeper messages took root. Self-mastery over spectacle, the wisdom behind ancient routines, and the rare but unmissable moment when the line between ceremony and action revealed itself, not as a divide, but as a sacred partnership. Countless viewers, regardless of origin, found in the story of Jack Whitmore and Aston a reminder that dignity is both shield and standard, echoing down the generations, tested in public, and forged, always, in the hidden hours of honest, disciplined work. Part 9. Deeper Lessons. As the commotion faded and Horse Guards Parade returned to its regal stillness, the world's attention didn't move on so quickly. In homes across Britain and the United States, families, veterans, and young people alike were left reflecting on the footage, the headlines, and the heated debates that followed. At first, reactions centered on heroic discipline and the dangers of viral stunts, but over the next 24 hours, a more thoughtful conversation began to emerge about what the spectacle really meant and why it struck such a chord with so many. First came the analysis of character, what it meant to be Jack Whitmore in that decisive moment. Jack's composure was not the absence of anger or fear, but the direct product of intense training and a powerful code of honor. He responded not with fury or pride, but with a restraint sharpened by years of learning when to hold back and when to act. Whether in the SAS or on a parade ground, real authority comes from knowing how to neutralize threat without crossing the line into unnecessary aggression. That day, before a global audience, Whitmore became an unexpected symbol of maximum effect with minimal violence, a philosophy seldom celebrated in the digital age, yet desperately needed. The story was not Whitmore's alone. Across talk shows and podcasts, experts in animal behavior explained Aston's reaction, how the black cavalry horse had shown a level of self-control rare even among elite service animals. That horse chose not to trample, not to panic, said a former cavalry commander interviewed for BBC Newsnight. Centuries of breeding, years of exposure to city life and careful training made that possible. Aston didn't freeze, he decided. For many, the realization hit. Such discipline in both man and animal was not accidental, but the result of a legacy built with humble, daily effort, generation after generation choosing the patient path. Breakdown panels and interviews with surviving Kingsguard echoed a second, broader theme. Tradition and power are not opposite forces. They are partners. Ceremony is not weakness. It is both shield and test. Whitmore's restraint and Aston's instinct were products of the same ancient system, one that refuses to separate ritual from readiness. Drill is not just for show, one sergeant explained solemnly. It's mind control of oneself. That's how we spare civilians, how we keep the chaos from winning. Social media, usually the birthplace of division, unexpectedly turned toward consensus. Parents used the event to teach children that the real winners are not those who hit the hardest, but those who stay calm when hurt or provoked. Artists drew Aston's calm stance as an emblem of steadiness, and late-night comedians, after the jokes, ended with rare words of genuine respect. At the stables that night, while the news still replayed the scuffle and the crowd's gasp, Whitmore took a quiet moment with Aston. He brushed the sweat from the stallion's coat in silence, the day's adrenaline giving way to gratitude. Across the aisle, a junior guardsman whispered, "Sir, your horse is braver than most men I've known." Whitmore smiled, placing a gentle hand on Aston's flank. "We trust each other. That's what keeps the peace." Their bond, built on shared risk, mirrored the deeper lesson of the day. All the ceremony in the world is meaningless without the strength, intelligence, and empathy to wield it wisely. In classrooms, dinner tables, and online groups, one final message spread, a warning and a hope. The line between ritual and reality can blur in a world obsessed with entertainment. But respect for people, for animals, for tradition must be chosen every time. True force is quiet, patient, and ready. It keeps chaos out not just through rules, but through example. The day at Horse Guards Parade will live on in more than just internet memory. It prompted a fresh look at everyday heroes, at the quiet work holding up public security, and at how unbroken lines of tradition can be, at their best, the most powerful form of modern strength. Ceremony and combat, when built on discipline, will always protect each other. And in the dark, shared spaces of a watching world, that is a truth worth passing down. As the dust settled over Horse Guards Parade and the city lights of London blinked on, a quiet understanding took root among those who had witnessed the day's events, whether in person or through screens flaring thousands of miles away. The story had sparked robust debate, heated arguments, and even memes, but beneath every headline and hashtag, the lessons of the afternoon endured far longer than the spectacle itself. The arrogant punch that started it all was not just a case of one man's reckless bravado. It was a test, a blunt challenge that demanded an answer not in sound or fury, but in three indispensable qualities: military discipline, horsemanship born of knowledge and trust, and an unwavering spirit of service. Each of these was woven through every second of Jack Whitmore's measured response and Aston's unflinching calm. The confrontation was ended not by domination, but by a living demonstration of competence held steady in the face of pressure. In a world where social media often rewards volume over value and provocation over principle, this moment offered a profound counterpoint. The King's Guard did not respond with spectacle. Their answer was found in restraint, in the honed skills that come from training to both protect and de-escalate, and in the subtle signals passed between a rider and his mount. Whitmore and Aston stood not as artifacts, but as living proof that old traditions, solid discipline, and humility in action still matter. Their response wasn't perfect because it followed a script. It was perfect because it was real, unpredictable, genuine, deeply human. Tyler Grant's downfall was not just the result of a legal boundary crossed. It was the inevitable end of confusing personal stardom with the weight of collective responsibility. In the age of the content creator, the boundary between innocent fun and criminal recklessness is razor thin. Tyler, like many, thought that a show could never become a crime, or that its consequences would vanish with the next trending topic. But the law held him to account, not out of vengeance, but to remind everyone that some boundaries exist for everyone's good. In the end, the legacy of that moment extended far beyond one person's 15 minutes of fame and became an enduring caution for a generation raised with phones always rolling. What can we take from it, beyond the drama and debates? That respect for those who serve, for living traditions, and for the animals and people holding the thin lines of order is never outdated. Each salute on the parade ground, each hour of patient training, and every act of restraint under duress sustains the very freedoms that make such public ceremonies possible. The King's Guard, like so many, in quiet, visible, and sometimes thankless posts around the world, stand not for show, but for the deeper values carved out by centuries of history, discipline, and sacrifice. If you ever come to London, feel the stone beneath your feet at Horse Guards Parade, hear the echoing clip of hooves, and watch the silent discipline of soldier and steed. Stop for a moment. Stand behind the rails, give a respectful nod if you wish, or simply witness. Let yourself realize what almost no camera can capture, that true courage and tradition are not frozen in history, but alive in every careful act and every decision not to escalate. If you're tempted to break that line for a picture or a joke, remember how quickly that line defends itself and why those on the other side choose peace over spectacle. It's not just about avoiding consequences, it is about honoring a trust passed from generation to generation. As the story closes, imagine one last crescendo. The parade ground lit by sunset, the heavy music of a military bugle fading softly, Aston standing tall as the colors fall, and the regiment returning to their ancient rhythm. The crowd grows quiet. What remains is respect, and the silent applause in the hearts of those watching. For Jack Whitmore, for Aston, and for everyone who quietly holds the line between order and chaos, this is the applause that counts the most. So, if this story resonated with you, share what you've learned. That real strength is quiet, that traditions only matter when lived well, and that respecting those who serve, human and animal alike, keeps us all a bit safer and a bit more connected to the best of our past. Please, if you valued this story, like and follow our channel for more lessons in everyday heroism and living history. Until next time, let the echo of steady hooves and fading brass bands remind us, sometimes the bravest answer is simply to hold fast.